Joe Biden evacuates yet another embassy in his presidency, this time in the Sudan. Meanwhile, he is being accused of leaving thousands of Americans to die in the war-torn country. So we'll go through what's happening with that, what some of the review is, and what is actually happening with the evacuation, and a number of other things going on with that particular story. In other news, The Federal Reserve is getting ready to release why Silicon Valley Bank failed, as First Republic teeters on the edge of being taken over as well by the FDIC. So we'll go over some of that and what that means for the economy and where we go with that. Jacob Chansley wants his January 6th sentence vacated for probably very good reason because, well, it definitely, from at least looking in on the outside, doesn't look like he was actually guilty of what he was hit with. And Mike Lee challenges Elizabeth Warren after she claims that right-wing extremists have hijacked the Supreme Court. It is going to be all this and more over here on Contemporary. I was the one flying the balloons. I am Jay Edgar. And this is Contemporary. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Contemporary. My name is Jay Edgar, and this is your evening news. And we've actually got a really light show tonight. I've got an extra finance article here today, but I've only got, outside of the finance segment, like 17 tabs. So we might only go just a little bit over an hour tonight. Oddly enough, it'll be one of the first times that, because I always said when people were guest hosting, I always asked for the guest host to only take an hour. We typically do 2 hours here when it's me, but it's my show. It's important to me. It's important to the audience, but nobody's ever going to care about your project as much as you do. That was something that was some wisdom that was imparted to me by the great Brady Leonard of the No Gimmicks podcast one day when he explained that he didn't really have a producer anymore. So, and I always said to the people who were guest hosting when I took vacations on various times that it takes about 20 tabs to fill up an hour, so we'll see what we do here. There is a lot that I want to say about the Sudan and a lot of stuff that I want to dig into, so we'll probably go a little bit further into the Sudanese articles than I usually would, but I haven't been paying attention to this conflict at all because I've been paying more attention to what's happening on this side of the pond with our country, with our government that's busy trying to screw us out of our retirements, our jobs, and our banking sector. So that's what I've been mostly focused on. And trying to make this a kitchen table show, stuff that affects you every day. And as much as we talk about the Ukraine, as much as we talk about Afghanistan, as much as we talk about Sudan, except for the taxation that goes into our military presence into them, those really don't affect us on the kitchen table level. More as trying to put food on the table. So I will admit that I am a little bit behind on this Sudanese story, but I hope that we'll get caught up here tonight. And by the way, if we do get out of here excessively early, I found the Powell phone call. It's 16 minutes, so I don't want to go play it in its entirety if we're running up on the clock, obviously. But if we are running close to the show and it's only a little bit after 7, I think we're going to watch that video because I did listen to it while I was show prepping, and it is hilarious. It is absolutely everything that you think it would be and more. So we'll be talking about that if we get down to that end of things here. But we're going to get into the news. We're going to get into what we're here to talk about over here on Contemporary. Before we get started, make sure you guys go check out great programming such as The Daily Ignoramus, The Breakdown with Birkenhoff, The R-Rated Conservative, The Porch Boys. Go check out Tweets by Brit, Mr. Behavior, The No Gimmicks Podcast, and more as we bring you a better news experience. Don't get your news from people who wear suits that cost more than your house. Get your news from people who are just like you. So, with that, let's get into the news of the day. We're going to start, as we always do, with the finance. And I know some people don't necessarily agree with the finance segment, but do tell your friends, get some of your friends in here, and we'll get a lively discussion going on the end of this too. And one of the other things too is if we only have an hour's worth of content, maybe we'll interact with you guys a little bit more tonight. Who knows? We play this show by ear. We really do. There's no professionalism here whatsoever. But let's get started. On the Dow. The Dow actually spending another day up with First Republic doing what it's doing. The Dow surprisingly spent 2 days up and finished April with a bang. The Dow ending at 34,098.16. That is up 272 points even, or 0.8% on the day. And it looks like after the futures gave it a tumble, it rocketed back and stayed steady throughout the rest of the day. So we'll talk a bit about what happened with that in our one finance article. We don't do two anymore. We only do one because layoffs, I think, is a much more important story. Looking in at your Bitcoin, which also had a fairly steady day. It wound up closing a little bit lower, but not by much, $58.8 US, down to $29,421 US and 50 US cents, or about 0.1% on the day. And it was much lower. It was even a little bit higher, but it was much, much lower. So that's sort of steady trading and steady even-handedness with people who are both desiring the currency, but also people who are probably using it to make ends meet after they're getting laid off. We will continue to watch this and see what happens with this. And of course, over the weekend, we'll pull it out to the 5-day and see what happened over the weekend as well. Gas prices in Madison, mostly steady still, although we see a couple other stations diving on the Isthmus. The 338 is down to 326. Entering the Isthmus, the quick trip is at 338 still, but the BP is down to 321. Those 350s are staying pretty stubborn on the west side, and it's actually below that here where I'm at right now. So we are seeing some reprieve off of this. This is not official financial advice, and anytime I do some speculation, I do have to lead with that, because if I give you wrong financial advice, you can turn around and sue me unless I put that disclaimer that this is not official financial advice. This is not official financial advice, but just because of what I see coming out of the Middle East, what I'm seeing with BRICS, I am a little bit afraid that this is a calm before the storm. We'll keep watching this, and you'll get your daily update as to what the prices did that day, so you can make your assessment as to where to go. And these prices do not most likely reflect your local markets. Do check your local markets for your current gas prices, but we do this on a trend to see what the trends are doing by looking at one single market for well over 3 years at this point. So that's where we are at on the gas prices. Let's grab one from IBD. From Investors Business Daily. Nah, nobody gets banned. I do the banning around here if somebody does get banned. And I'm like really lenient about that. The rules in the Discord are the rules in chat. Basically, don't dox anybody. Alright, stock market closes weeks higher. First Solar drops 9% after earnings report. From Kimberly Keening. Stock market indices rallied Friday afternoon, closing at the highs of the day. Earnings reports were the highlights this week, producing wild stock swings. The Dow, the S&P, pulled ahead 0.8, while the Nasdaq gained 0.7. The Russell 2000 fared slightly better, with the major indices rising 0.9. The Dow and the S&P closed the week with a 0.9% gain. The Nasdaq was the big winner, posting a 1.3 increase, thanks to several positive big tech's earnings reports. The Nasdaq held above the 12,000 psychological level. Once again, the New York Stock Exchange and Nasdaq volume rose, compared with the same time on Thursday in preliminary numbers. The Nasdaq 100 Tracking and Invesco QQQ Trust ETF lifted 0.7, while the Innovator IBD 50 ETF rallied 1.2. Crude oil inched 2.6% higher to 76.72 a barrel. Gold futures dipped 0.1 to 1,998 per ounce. The SPDR Gold Trust ETF was relatively unchanged and in sync with the yellow metal. Bitcoin slid 1.5% to 29,490. Crypto exchange Coinbase lost 0.7. The 10-year yield dipped 7 basis points to 3.45. The CME FedWatch tool shows over 80% odds for a 0.25% rate hike at the May Fed policy meeting next week, and that's partially because we got a hotter than expected quarterly inflation report, which I don't know how you go hotter than expected. We had the volume for all 3 months, but, you know. First Solar tumbled 9% over after reporting Q1 misses on EPS and sales. Shares of the solar module manufacturer fell below the 50-day moving average, a warning signal. So, that is where we are at as far as our business. Let's look at the layoffs report. Our layoff of the day today is Jenny Craig. That is a name that I have not heard in many, many years. I didn't even know Jenny Craig was still going. Like, that was a big, big thing when I was a kid in the 90s. Jenny Craig. I lost all the weight with Jenny. Jenny helped me. Jenny did this. Jenny did that. Well, apparently Jenny's not going to be helping too many more people. Jenny Craig tells staffers it's winding down its weight loss centers and warns of mass layoffs. From Sarah Ruberg. Jenny Craig has alerted employees to potential mass layoffs as it begins winding down physical operations and hunts for a buyer. According to communications, the weight loss company sent home staffers this week. Uh-oh. The Writers Guild is gearing up for a strike. I'll put that on Monday. In fact, let's do a Google search of that right now. Oh, yep, there it is. Yeah, we'll put that on Monday's ticket. Thank you for that, Grant, by the way. And as always, the most reliable place to go and put any news articles that you see. If you are in the Discord, you can tag me on Twitter. That's always an option. You can use the Discord, or throw it in the chat. I read the chat, even if I don't keep up with the chat as much as other creators do. I do read every single chat that you guys put in. Every single time, no matter what. Because it's important to me what you guys are saying. The company has said it has begun going through a sales process for the last couple months. According to a document titled Jenny Craig Company Transition FAQs that was dated Tuesday and provided to NBC News. Several Jenny Craig staffers said the company alerted them in recent days about potential layoffs. Well, we might be going down that communism diet too somewhere in the near future, depending on how bad the recession goes. Instead of just going and working out and getting meal plans, we just stop eating because we can't afford the food, because we all lost our jobs. The FAQ document said, while we had to issue warn notices specifically for sites where we had more than 50 people potentially impacted, this will likely impact all employees in some manner. We do not know what the exact employees or groups whom will be impacted, if any employees may be retained. As a result, we would suggest that you anticipate that your employment may be impacted and begin to seek other employment. It said, oof. That is rough. Holy sh... The Federal WARN Act generally requires employers with at least 100 staffers to give workers 60 days notice of potential mass layoffs or worksite closures. It couldn't be determined how many employees received the FAQ document. I'm willing to bet that it's going to be more than 100. On Friday morning, after NBC News reported on the layoff warnings, a Jenny Craig spokesperson said the company is embarking on the next phase of our business to evolve with the changing landscapes of today's consumers. Like many other companies, we're currently transitioning from a brick-and-mortar retail business to a customer-friendly e-commerce-driven model. That's not what this sounds like. We will have more details to share in the coming weeks as our plans are solidified. So, your layoffs report, your layoff of the day is Jenny Craig. And then I've got one from the Daily Mail talking about the price points. From Mail Online. Sweet Home, Alabama. Retirees priced out of Florida are moving further along the coast to Baldwin County, where they're finding cheaper mortgages and taxes, but the same stunning beaches. I guess I never would have thought of Alabama for a retirement home. This is from Alyssa Guzman. American retirees who have been priced out of Florida are now landing on the coast in Alabama, where the same warm weather and stunning beaches come at a fraction of the cost. Retired financial planner John Fox, 70, and his retired plastic surgeon wife, Dr. Louise Turkula, 67, of Long Lake, were hoping to join their friends in Jacksonville or Naples during their retirement, but quickly found their finances didn't quite stretch to what they were looking for in the Sunshine State. Really? You're a financial planner and a plastic surgeon, and you can't afford Orlando? I'm not going to say what my aunt and uncle do, because it's kind of a niche business and you'd probably be able to dox them off that, but I can tell you that my aunt and uncle are loaded. But they don't make near the kind of money that a plastic surgeon makes. And they can afford the Orlando area. They can afford, from what John has told me, one of the ritziest parts of the Orlando area. On top of it. You were either that bad at your finances when you were going through your practice, or it's just really gone that bad and my aunt and uncle got in at the right time. But holy crap. Instead, the couple headed north to the neighboring state, Alabama, and dished out a cool $955,000 for a 4-bedroom, 3,000 square foot home on Ano Island in Baldwin County, the fastest growing in the state as older Americans flocked for cheaper mortgages and property taxes. Dracula's brother lived on the island, but that didn't stop Fox from being shocked that he'd actually purchased land in the Yellowhammer State, giving up his dreams of waking up on the warm beaches in Florida. I'm actually moving to Alabama, he recalled, thinking in disbelief to the Wall Street Journal. He worried about moving to the Deep South as a progressive, but after visiting his wife's siblings, his nerves were calmed as he realized his future neighbors had a wide range of interests and opinions. Oh, I am saving this. I have friends in Alabama who are extremely conservative, and I am saving this for them because I want to see what their reaction is to that. That's actually kind of funny. I like that. And I like the fact that that's happening. So, I guess you are price pointed out from the ritzy neighborhoods in Florida. But yeah, I mean, you're still going to have the middle class areas and whatnot. I've been to actual purchased homes in middle class Orlando, in the inner city. A quaint little 3-bedroom house owned by one Robert. I'm not going to say his last name, even though he put it out there all the time. That's between him and the internet, not me and the internet. So, yeah. That's kind of funny. And I mean, they're not far from the border either way, according to this map. I mean, there's Pensacola right there. So, maybe they'll find happiness there. We'll see. Alright, we got to talk about the Sudan. And again, as was mentioned at the top of the show, I am learning about some of this for the first time. We're going to start with CBS News. Sudan ceasefire holds barely, but there's border chaos as thousands try to flee, fighting between generals. From Ahmed Shaukat. A fragile ceasefire in the Sudan appeared to be clinging. By the way, I grew up in the 90s, and I know it's not correct to say the in front of it. I'd still say it with the Ukraine, and I'm still going to say it with the Sudan. These are two countries that traditionally had the word the in front of them, and I'm going to continue using it. A fragile ceasefire in the Sudan appeared to be clinging on Friday morning despite heavy explosions and gunfire echoing across the capital city of Khartoum and the adjacent city of Omdurman. But the shaky ceasefire between Sudan's two top generals, whose vicious power struggle has left more than 500 people dead, wasn't nearly enough to staunch a flow of civilians, Sudanese, and foreign nationals despite desperate to escape the country. There are believed to be hundreds of American nationals trapped in Sudan, and the U.S. government has announced no plans for evacuation flights or other efforts to get those people to safety, as European and other nations have been doing all week. Really? Actually, I'm not that surprised by that. The danger of such evacuation operations amid the chaos in the Sudan was made clear on Friday as Turkey said one of its aircraft was hit by gunfire just outside the capital, though there were no casualties reported. The reports of new violence Friday came just hours after both sides said they accepted a 72-hour extension of a ceasefire that expired Thursday evening. The warring generals appeared to be constraining their battle for control of the East African nation as other countries tried to get their own civilians out. So, I do know where the Sudan is, but I'm going to put that up here for my libertarian friends who will remind you that, hey, unless you can point it out on a map, you shouldn't even be talking about it. Which, and again, I haven't really been talking about it. So, let's get this up here so we can have a look here. There is the Sudan across the Red Sea from Saudi Arabia, pretty much across the Red Sea from Mecca, which is the Mecca of the Islamic religion. We've got a couple border disputes with that outside of what's going on in Sudan itself. Looks like Egypt actually has a border dispute going on with the Sudan. And then another small border dispute with South Sudan, which before this story popped up, I actually had not realized that there was a South Sudan, because I've been focusing more on the disaster that's going on in this country. And again, I haven't even looked and seen what's starting off this. I'm hoping that one of these articles tells us what's going on with this, but the ceasefire is holding for right now as people are trying to get out of there, but you know, our country is not doing it, so that's fun. Let's keep reading. But Sudan's own people have even fewer options. Thousands have flocked to the Sudan's borders, including its northern frontier with Egypt, hoping to escape. Egyptian authorities said Thursday that 16,000 non-Egyptians have entered the country from the Sudan in just a few days, and more than 5,300 Egyptian nationals were evacuated. But thousands of civilians remain stuck at Egyptian-Sudanese border crossings in circumstances described to CBS News as dire. A Sudanese university student who made it across the border into Egypt on Wednesday told CBS News the situation when she left Khartoum was terrible. We couldn't sleep, all we heard was gunshots and aircraft. It's kind of like South LA. There was no water, no electricity, and we were just trying to survive. Again, South LA. Said the woman, who asked that her name not be published for probably obvious reasons. She said that when she finally arrived at the Egyptian border, after a very long bus ride, thousands were already waiting there. People were sleeping on the ground and children were crying, she said. There was a lack of food and water and no bathrooms that humans could actually use. Egypt does not require Sudanese women or children to have a visa to enter the country, but men up to the age of 50 do need the documentation. That has meant that some families have been forced to split up as men wait for visas. Ebtehal al-Niama told CBS News that she'd finally made it to Cairo on Friday with her children, but her brother had been forced to stay behind. We were traveling together, me and my kids, and my brother and other relatives, most of them women, she said. My brother couldn't enter with us because he didn't have a visa, even after he told them I'm with my sister and she has kids, and that he is helping me. She said it was now difficult to keep in touch with her brother as the fighting has cut power to many parts of the Sudan, leaving people unable to charge their phones. It's not clear who is being granted visas or visa exemptions to enter Egypt. Sudanese people have said information is increasingly hard to come by. At first, Egyptian authorities appeared to be granting many exemptions, which encouraged even more people to head to the border, but as the crowds grew after more than a week of violence in the Sudan, al-Niama said there was little reliable information available. So then we have continuing stories of people who are trying to get out of there. No information in this particular article into what started all this, which, again, if I don't see anything in any of these articles, I will be looking into this myself at some point. And depending on what the propaganda media has to tell me, I may actually have to speculate a little bit. Ukraine, Donbass. From the BBC, Sudan evacuation, we're very grateful to be alive. From Charlie Adams at Stansted Airport and Marie Jackson in London. After days of dread, fear, and desperation, British families are now on rescue flights out of the Sudan, making the 3,000-mile journey to safety. At Stansted Airport, emotions ran high as relatives clutched flowers and waited to see whether their loved ones were on the next airport bus. One little boy called out, "Mum!" when he saw his mother get off the bus. The arrivals, looking tired and relieved, were coming to the end of a very long and frightening journey. Many will have risked their lives to travel without any assistance across Sudan's capital, Khartoum, during a fragile ceasefire to reach an airfield. From there, they joined RAF planes to take them out of the Sudan, away from the conflict, and on to Cyprus, where they were brought to the UK on a chartered flight and into the arms of waiting relatives. As of around 2200 BST on Wednesday, 6 flights had evacuated 536 British nationals from the Sudan, the Foreign Office said. But there has been criticism of the slowness of the UK's government evacuations compared with other Western countries such as Germany, which completed its evacuations Tuesday morning. That's okay, we haven't even started. Home Secretary Suella Braverman said the government would be supporting British nationals and their dependents, but added there were no plans to introduce a legal route for people fleeing Sudan to claim asylum in the UK. However, Alicia Kearns, chairwoman of the Commons Foreign Affairs Select Committee, said elderly people dependent on their British citizen children should be allowed on flights to the UK. In the same way we treat children who are dependent on their parents, we should respect that there's some elderly people dependent on the children, she said. Alright. So now we actually get into what's happening with this. Clashes between the Sudanese army and paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces, began on April 15th. Hundreds of people have since died and thousands have been injured in the conflict. Writing on Twitter, Foreign Secretary James Cleverly warned the UK could not guarantee how many further flights would depart once the ceasefire ends. Again, probably for good reason. So England is getting the majority of their people out. From Fox News, U.S. government begins land evacuation of American civilians in the Sudan. From Liz Fridden, Adam Sabes, the U.S. government has begun a land evacuation of American civilians who are in Sudan amid a growing civil conflict. Realistically, and I have to question this because I don't know, but why are there so many people from other countries in this country? Like, I don't know what the resource draw is. Sudan has been, for the most part, a forgotten African country. It's not Somalia or Ethiopia, where we constantly have humanitarian crises. From what I understand, it's actually somewhat wealthy, being adjacent to Egypt. Not completely, but somewhat actually first world. It's not a third world hellscape like Somalia and Ethiopia are. A U.S. official told Fox News there's an ongoing effort to bus a large group of Americans to the Red Sea, where Port Sudan is located. It's unclear how many Americans are being evacuated or how many buses are being used in the effort. Pentagon Press Secretary Brigadier General Pat Ryder said during Thursday's press briefing that U.S. Africa Command was flying unmanned ISR drones over potential land routes in Sudan, adding that U.S. naval assets are off Sudan's coast and in the case of evacuation. We have focused our efforts to support overland routes. Well, and again, under the ceasefire, that would have been the ideal time to put an airplane in the middle of this place, but Again, I don't actually know enough about this country. Like, by the time the Ukraine had popped off, we actually had, at the time, had enough information and enough propaganda supporting that we kind of had an idea what was going on, or at least what the mainstream media wanted us to believe was going on. This kind of just happened, and the next thing you know, we're hearing about the embassies evacuated and paramilitary group this, and oh, by the way, they're breaking into a biolab that has polio samples. Right in time for an election. Honk honk. Utterly useless, Biden abandons thousands of Americans in war-torn Sudan, from Tim Meads. This is an op-ed. So the opinions that are expressed in this article are the opinions of Tim Meads, not necessarily the opinions of the Daily Wire, Contemporary, Turns the Pages Productions, or your host, J. Edgar. Let's read. The U.S. has abandoned thousands of Americans in the Sudan, despite other countries being able to evacuate their own citizens from the war-torn country this week. Why is that? The White House hasn't really offered to explain, other than to say that the intelligence suggested it was too dangerous. I mean, France, Germany, Italy, and most of the UK, Spain and the Netherlands all did it, as listed right here. And more have been able to facilitate travel for their nationals in the country. U.S. diplomatic staff were safely rescued. Well, let's do them first, apparently. But for some reason, U.S. intelligence said it was too dangerous to try to evacuate any non-government Americans. Wow. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Oh my God. I can't believe I just read those words. And again, this is an op-ed, so I don't know, whoops, whether or not this is the official stance of the Biden admin, or if this is Tim Meads putting his own spin on it. But I'm going to tell you right off the bat, if I was president, it would be civilians first. And everybody who worked for my administration would know that going in. Civilians and the most helpless among us first. Again, I don't know if this is the official position of the White House. We haven't heard from token diversity hire. But I'm telling you right off the bat, if I was sitting in the Oval Office, number one, I would be fighting with the Secret Service to get myself down there to get my people out of there. They probably wouldn't let me go, but I would be fighting with them every step of the way. And number two, if you sign up to work in my government, then remember, if you're going to work in a foreign country, it is civilians first. Why? Because I was elected to protect my civilians in my country. When pressed on why the most powerful country in the world couldn't evacuate more people, White House Press Secretary Token Diversity Hire did not really answer on Thursday. Do you have video of her doing this? No, I don't, so I have to go do Jean-Pierre impression. Do I have something to read, a script to read off of over here? Yes, I do. Look, given the president's direction and what you're saying right now, no, this is the reporter. Never mind, that's not Token Diversity Hire. Given the president's direction and what you're saying right now, a number of countries have evacuated citizens over the course of the last several days and taken advantage of the ceasefire the U.S. helped put into place, a reporter said during the daily press briefing. The U.S. still has not. What is different about your risk assessment right now, or security assessment, than what other countries are looking at as they've gone in and gotten people out? It's a good question, but Diversity Hire evaded by suggesting that a direct answer would implicate foreign intelligence operations and security. That's a throwaway line of, I don't have an answer. It might be the opinion of Jill, but not Joe. He doesn't remember his opinion. Come on, man! And we've been clear on what the president laying out, which is what I did, is laying out at the president's direction what we have done, how we move forward, how we worked with allies and partners to get Americans out, and we've been pretty clear about this, says the most opaque administration official in history. For the past several months, for the past year, what the situation in Sudan, and so we're going to continue to have these conversations. The reporter appeared annoyed by her hesitation to answer. The security alerts from the State Department over the course of last year never told people to leave. They told people never to travel there. Yeah, that's true. Clearly there's something that's being seen, he said. I'm not asking for intelligence. I'm saying, can you explain the process here, given the president's directive to help? Not surprisingly, she could not explain, other than to say the State Department was providing assistance. World's worst press secretary, everybody. We've got one from The Blaze talking about our Congress saying, let's not do the forever wars here. Conservative and progressive House members vote to withdraw U.S. troops from Somalia, but majorities in both parties shoot the measure down. Yeah, who's shocked? I'm not shocked. Who's shocked? Who's shocked the Uniparty wants more soldiers in a war-torn region? From Alex Nitzberg. Majorities of House lawmakers in both political parties shot down a measure that would have compelled President Brandon to pull all U.S. troops out of Somalia, other than troops protecting the American embassy. So this is neighboring, I believe. Let me make sure I've got my African geography correct. Nope, we've got Ethiopia in the middle. With another big disputed border, by the way. The text of the measure would have been instructed the president to remove all U.S. armed forces, other than the United States Armed Forces assigned to protect the U.S. Embassy from Somalia by no later than the date that is 365 days after the adoption of this resolution. Minorities from both parties voted in favor of the measure, with leftist lawmakers like Alexandria Ocasio-Chavez and Cori Bush joining with conservative legislators like Chip Roy and Thomas Massie to support the concurrent resolution. Overall, 52 Republicans and 50 Democrats voted to yank U.S. troops out of Somalia, while a whopping 165 Republicans and 156 Democrats voted against the measure. Who's shocked? Who's surprised? By a large margin, Congress supports keeping U.S. troops in Somalia. I do not. Most voters probably don't either, Matt Gaetz tweeted. Well, I'd like to see more of our soldiers out of war-torn areas, back on the ground, back defending the homeland. And not necessarily in war zones across the world. Alright, let's talk First Republic. We've got a live post here, which we're going to read first from CNN, from the blog post. We'll read the first one, then we'll go on and look at some of the other articles for this. As regulators reveal why SVB and Signature Bank failed, First Republic teeters on the brink. So we look at the first one here. Stocks in the week up despite lingering concerns about First Republic. We know about that one. I'm actually going to skip this because the live updates are hard to follow. Let's go right into the Daily Wire instead then. Federal Reserve releases review detailing why Silicon Valley Bank collapsed. From Ben Ziesloft. Officials at the Federal Reserve concluded on Friday that Silicon Valley Bank collapsed last month because executives failed to properly assess macroeconomic risk and volatility within the tech sector upon which the firm was heavily reliant. That's not even close to the reason that Silicon Valley Bank collapsed. That may have driven some of why people were pulling investments out of there, but the fact of the matter is that they took a bunch of securities, probably too many, while cash was cheap and interest rates were at zero. And once the interest rates popped up, you couldn't sell those securities for face value because people were getting better securities priced in with the inflationary pressures on there. And they had no assets to fall back on, and the FDIC had to come back in to put a stop to the bank run. Good try, though, Federal Reserve. The implosion of Silicon Valley Bank, where the vast majority of account balances exceeded the $250,000 threshold, backed by the FDIC, prompted the government-backed company to secure both insured and uninsured accounts at the firm in order to prevent additional bank runs. Signature nevertheless collapsed days later, while other regional financial institutions such as First Republic continue to languish confidence in these as the sector diminishes. SVB imploded because of a textbook case of mismanagement, as senior leadership failed to manage basic interest rate and liquidity risk. Now see, that's closer to the truth. That's still not quite the truth, but that's closer to the truth. And board members failed to oversee senior leadership and hold them accountable, according to a landmark review of the crisis released by the Federal Reserve, which is responsible for regulating private banks and will put the propaganda out there to make sure that you don't blame the government or government policies. And by the way, there was a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B with that one. Yes, there was mismanagement at Silicon Valley Bank, but there was also mismanagement of government policy, which the Federal Reserve will do everything they can to absolve. SVB was highly vulnerable in ways that both the board of directors and senior management did not fully appreciate, officials said in the report. These vulnerabilities, foundational and widespread managerial weakness, a highly concentrated business model, and a reliance on uninsured deposits left Silicon Valley Bank acutely exposed to the specific combination of rising interest rates and slowing activity in the tech sector that materialized in 22 and early 23. So, where are we at with this now that we have their report, their propaganda about this? Again, I remind you, most viewers who are viewing both live and will be viewing after the fact do not have to worry about a bank run. 99.999% of the people that are watching this video will fall below the $250,000 per account threshold. A few of you will pop back up there, and especially some business leaders need to sit back and pay attention to what's going to happen with payroll, because that's coming up here. But even small business leaders, because I don't think I have any corporate CEOs that watch this, or any even big business leaders, medium-sized business leaders, where your payroll account probably will have more than $250,000. The vast majority of people who see this for their personal accounts will not exceed $250,000. So the good news on that is that you don't have to worry if they do come back down here, as long as your bank is backed by the FDIC. But I'm going to say right off the bat, now would be the time to check that. And there's another deposit insurance company that does the same thing as well, and I cannot think of what it's called. But I know that there are two at this point, because I hear the banks that are advertised, both FDIC and the other one. I can't think of what the other one's called, but there are two. But right now would be the time to check and make sure that your bank is a member FDIC. And if it is, then you don't have a lot to worry about with this point here. But keep in mind, your employer, if this happens on a Friday like it did with SVB, if there is a big bank run that comes off here and everything does start to collapse, your payroll, your paycheck might be held up for a day to a week. And I can tell you right off the bat, having a paycheck bounce blows. It's happened to me. You don't want to go through that. Trust me. You're sitting out there, you start getting A, your card declined, and B, letters off there. Your checkbook is perfectly balanced. And you're supposed to have another $150 in your bank than you did. And the cashier looks up and says, hey, your card was declined and we don't know why. Then you go up to the bank, because your bank is in the same grocery stores where you were trying to buy groceries, and you say, "Hey, what's going on here?" And they look it through your ledger and they say, "Oh, hey, see this deposit here? This got returned as non-sufficient funds." Oh, that was my paycheck. That's lame. Monetary policymakers have worked to increase the target federal funds rate over the past year in an effort to combat inflation by hiking interest rates across the economy, prompting heavy losses when Silicon Valley Bank sold a long-term bond portfolio to fund withdrawals. Assets in the overall banking system are now worth $2 trillion lower than their book value due to the elevated interest rates, according to a recent study from the National Bureau of Economic Research. So, and again, just like Mogwai said, the government is not to blame. They're the heroes. This is what I was told. Gen Z doesn't know how to balance a checkbook. No worries. Yeah, exactly. But moving on to talk about First Republic again, from Fox Business, First Republic shares nosedive amid uncertainty about the rescue deal. From Joe Toppy. Shares of First Republic remain in a death spiral amid reports of uncertainty about whether the lender could see a rescue deal. First Republic stock tumbled as much as 50% in midday trading. The bank's share value has already plummeted, and roughly 96% year to date, just more than 70% the last month amid federal discussions with banks and even private equity groups over a rescue solution for the distressed lender. Reuters reported Friday, citing people familiar with the situation, unnamed as always, that officials from the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the Treasury Department, and the Federal Reserve are coordinating talks to rescue First Republic. Private sector efforts have yet to yield a deal. The Federal Reserve released its assessment Friday morning of what led to Silicon Valley Bank's collapse, which we just read. Meanwhile, the FDIC will release a separate report detailing the findings in an internal review of its supervision of the former Signature Bank. So, they're looking right now to see if they have to take over or not. And yeah, there are other banks that are in talks to come back and buy this back out. Hopefully this comes out into a point where basically all the bankers change the color of their shirt, but keep going business as usual. From CNBC. First Republic most likely headed for FDIC receivership, sources say shares dropped 40%. From Jesse Pound. Shares of First Republic dropped sharply on Friday as hopes dimmed for a rescue deal that could keep the bank afloat. Sources told CNBC's David Faber that most likely outcome of the troubled bank is for the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation to take it into receivership. The stock slid 43% and was halted for volatility multiple times. Yeah, typically if they are pulling the circuit breaker on this kind of stuff, it's done. It's over. The fact that they're doing it multiple times in the day. But again, unfortunately, we may be at a point where we start to see that in Wall Street as well. For the rest of the stocks. This is going to get a little bit hairy, you guys. If you've got a place to plant, hoe in another row. If you've got access to a gigantic pot and some jars, can up some of what you pulled out of your garden or even some of what you took out of the grocery store for preservation. Remember, if you're doing fresh vegetables, you need a pressure can. You can't just water bath can those. Do not just water bath can vegetables. But go ahead and, if you got some salsa or something highly acidic, make sure you get some of that preserved. Get a little bit more ammo and get a little bit more food in your freezer now. Not official financial advice, but stuff that you should be doing even in the best of times. The FDIC is asking other banks for potential bids on First Republic if the regulator were to seize the bank, sources told Faber. There is still hope for a solution that doesn't include receivership, according to these sources. Well, we'll keep watching. They won't notice ActBlue draining their savings. Yeah, exactly. ActBlue is one of the worst ones too, by the way. ActBlue it drives me crazy. Because our friends in the media will let just ActBlue slip under the table without a question about where the source of where the funds are going, what's happening with there, and the fact that it is an open slush fund where they go and fund whatever Democrat candidate happens to be the one that needs the funding most. If you put it, by the way, this is an open secret, but if you put $1 into ActBlue to support your favorite Democrat candidate, if you have one, you have no idea whether or not that dollar is going to go to that candidate. Because it goes into a major slush fund where they just move it around to say, hey, this person's outraising this other person as much as they can. It happened to a lot of Stacey Abrams' campaign funds when the polls came out and showed that there was no chance for her. They took because she raised a bunch of money on her own statistically, but they took a bunch of that, and I know they sunk it into Florida. They sunk it into the the senatorial seat in that state. They put a bunch of it into the Ron Johnson race, but they also put a bunch of it into the Tony Evers race too. I know what you mean with dual citizen. I know exactly what you mean by that. Alright, let's talk Q Shaman. From Politico. Q Shaman says former lawyer failed him over January 6 videos. From Josh Gerstein. An eccentric Arizona man whose face paint, fur stole, bare chest, and bizarre headdress made him one of the best-known figures of the January 6 Selfie Fest, is asking to be resentenced, saying his former lawyer failed to adequately investigate video footage indicating that, at times, police officers seemed to have eased his movements through the Capitol that day. A new attorney for Chansley, more often called Q Shaman, filed a motion Thursday night asking that Chansley's almost 3.5-year prison sentence be set aside because of ineffective assistance from the prior counsel, Albert Watkins, in connection with the video issue. Chansley's motion, filed by former federal prosecutor William Shipley, says Watkins should have sought to postpone Chansley's sentencing in November after prosecutors signaled that they plan to show Capitol Police closed-circuit surveillance video at that proceeding. The filing of a notice they intend to use CCTV video should have caused attorney